Villeneuve-sur-Bourg, a Burgundy town, had a gentle night air on May 18th. The limestone-faced houses, quiet witnesses to 4 centuries of history, seemed to hold their breath for this precious moment each year. A solemn gathering gathered in Saint-Germain Church's square. That night, 350 people carried white candles that lit up the velvety darkness. Melted wax and flowering lime trees in the square created a melancholy traditional ambience. The 17th-century religious masterpiece Our Lady of the Springs stood at the center of this devotional gathering. This 2-meter-tall Carrara marble sculpture represented the Virgin Mary in all her maternal majesty. Her small extended arms were a sign of universal welcome, and her face had a celestial peace that had comforted generations of believers. The candlelight illuminated her nicely sculpted golden crown, decorated with little local amethysts. The statue rested on Pierre Dubois' century-old oak stretcher that night, as it had since 1625. Years of processions gave the wood a rich patina that reflected the flames. For sturdy bronze handles produced in the nearby village's factories permitted bearers to lift this spiritual treasure with reverence. Marie-Louise Moreau, 52, a retired schoolteacher and 8th-generation Virgin carrier, clutched her white gloves nervously. She was the main bearer for 10 years, but this night felt different. There was a strange tension, as if something spectacular was about to happen. Jean-Baptiste Rousseau, 48, the local carpenter and devout guy, fixed his white shirt quietly beside her. His grandfather taught him how to carry the statue and the spirituality that came with it. The Virgin is never too heavy for those who carry her with love, he was taught as a youngster. Pierre Fontaine, 35, a mechanic and mystic, checked the stretcher one last time. This was his 7th procession as a porter, and he remembered the emotion of lifting the hallowed statue for the first time. At the end, Marcel Petit, 63, a former teacher turned sacristan, shared his 20 years of wisdom. His aged but muscular hands knew every stretcher bump and balance needed to carry their precious weight with dignity. Father Antoine Mercier, 58, a 12-year parish priest, watched his flock with controlled emotion. In his white chasuble with gold lily embroidery, he carried the 18th-century silver processional cross. He practiced his deep, quiet voice all week for this celebration, the local liturgical year's pinnacle. Faces in the audience reflected rural variety. Sister Marguerite, 78, had never missed a procession since joining Saint Bernadette in 1975. Her blue eyes, still sparkling behind her rimmed spectacles, scrutinized the event like a tradition keeper. Thomas Martin, 17, casually filmed with his latest smartphone. He was raised in the faith and participated to commemorate his recently deceased grandma, but this year he was curious. He read unsettling tales online of unexplainable occurring during processions in different French regions. Mayor Claude Gallois, 60, retreated with his tricolor. As a pragmatic engineer, he valued this practice as part of the local cultural legacy, but was skeptical about the supernatural. At a period when rural depopulation was sweeping France, he saw the parade as a chance to strengthen communal cohesion. On their 30s, Emily and David Laurent, who had moved from Lyon 2 years previously, rocked their 8-month-old baby Lucas on a hand-embroidered baptismal blanket outside the church entrance. They sought peace and quiet in Villeneuve-sur-Bourg to raise their family, escaping city life. Joining the march for the first time symbolized integration into their new community. One May night, the air was extraordinarily pristine. The starry sky gleamed with extraordinary brilliance in this 800-person community, because light pollution was almost non-existent. Above the hills, the Milky Way appeared as a celestial trail blessing the crowd below. The square's 100-year-old lime trees breathed their fragrant scent, mixing it with candle wax and the church's last incense. A gentle breeze danced the flames and whispered among the leaves, like if nature was celebrating this hallowed vigil. Saint-Germain bells rang out suddenly. The centuries-old bronze shook the valley with its majesty. The long-awaited signal. Father Antoine hoisted his processional cross and shouted to the back row, "My dear brothers and sisters in Christ, like our ancestors for 4 centuries, we are preparing to accompany Our Lady of the Springs to the sacred spring that named our beloved village. May this nocturnal walk bring us prayer, contemplation, and brotherhood." The assembly was moved as the 4 carriers respectfully approached the statue on the square's antique cobblestones. Marie-Louise's heart raced as she experienced this moment for the 10th time. She always felt the same intense emotion, a mix of pride, humility, and sacred responsibility. The four men took their places at the stretcher's corners, their expert hands closing around the bronze handles, weathered by decades of processions. Roughly 120 kilograms was split among them with ease due to habit and years of perfect coordination. They exchanged a knowing gaze and hoisted their precious burden in a synchronized and fluid action. Father Antoine led the procession, his silver cross shining in the starlight. Only the quiet crunching of soles on the cobblestones and the faint tinkling of censer chains softly swung by the altar boys disturbed the silence. Behind him, 6 altar boys in white robes released wafts of fragrant incense that rose toward the sky like visible prayers. The statue, carried with solemn dignity that touched even the hardest hearts, was followed by the crowd of faithful in informal but respectful rows. Families gathered naturally. The elders led the procession with measured but determined steps. Couples with children made up the majority, and the youngest were last with their candles held aloft like torches of hope. This 1,000-year-old tradition required the procession to be silent, with prayers whispered and songs saved for the spring. This strolling meditation was accompanied only by the rustling of clothes and a mild breeze. The procession first took the village's main street, passing sleeping dwellings with gently illuminated windows. Some residents, too old or sick to participate, watched from their flower-filled balconies, making the sign of the cross as the beloved Virgin passed by. Mrs. Germaine Roussel, 86, confined to her wheelchair since her fall last winter, wept softly behind her half-open window. This procession had marked her entire life. Being unable to attend her first communion at 8, her wedding at 22, her 4 children's baptisms, and her husband's burial was one of her biggest losses. Her grandson Kevin had agreed to surreptitiously video the service, so she could experience it from her living room. The air was pure and invigorating at 15 degrees, with a slight humidity. The stars shone brightly, creating a breathtaking canopy of sky. Venus twinkled on the horizon, and the Big Dipper seemed to watch over the earthly procession with benevolence. After passing through the village's historic center, the procession began the climb to the spring, the traditional route to the holy site. This part of the journey, the most physically demanding, always tested the bearer's endurance. The slope, about 20% over 300 meters, wound between old oak trees, whose branches formed a natural canopy over the path. Tradition required a first stop halfway up the hill, near the old stone fountain that had not been used since the 1950s. Father Antoine spoke in the quiet night. "My beloved ones, let us pause to recite the Angelus together, as our ancestors have done for centuries in this place." The crowd immediately formed a complete circle around the statue in the path-widening clearing. The 350 voices prayed the traditional prayer. Mary received the news from the angel. Latin words rang beautifully in the forest solitude, producing a melody that seemed to touch the stars. The young mother Emily felt her son Lucas settle down in her arms at these united voices. The boy, who had been fidgeting since the parade began, settled down with his huge eyes locked on the statue, as if he saw something adults couldn't. This strange reaction from his son, who was generally restless at night, worried his father, David. This communion of voices and hearts moved Thomas, who was still suspicious but became more moved. He kept recording with his smartphone, but he got caught up in the emotion and forgot his original aim of documenting the incident. Sister Marguerite prayed with a fervor that emanated from her joined hands and closed eyes. At 78, she had experienced the times when heaven appeared close to earth, and this night felt special. After the Angelus, Father Antoine said, "Let us continue our ascent to the source, my brothers, with confidence and hope." The 4 bearers regrouped around the stretcher, their hands gripping the bronze handles, still warm from their palms. Marie-Louise counted mentally as always, 1, 2, 3, and they lifted the statue, but something was wrong, something inexplicable and disturbing. Everyone present would never forget what happened at that time, which defied logic. Despite the 4 experienced bearers' concerted efforts, the statue remained still. Weight wasn't an issue. They effortlessly lifted this monument hundreds of times. There was no mechanical issue. The master carpenter had lately checked and waxed the stretcher, which was flawless. It was as if Our Lady of the Springs had chosen to settle here, by the old fountain, halfway between the hamlet and the hallowed spring. A real yet invisible force held the statue immobile. Marie-Louise, distressed, let go and wiped her wet palms on her skirt. "Excuse me, my friends, let's try again," she said with a trembling voice that showed her emotion. She was aware that this was false. In 10 years lugging the statue, she had never encountered such resistance. The four bearers arranged themselves more carefully, examined their posture and grip, and tried to lift the statue again. They gave it their all, using all their years of experience. No movement whatsoever. The statue appeared to weigh many tons and be bound to the ground by invisible chains. Carpenter Jean-Baptiste, used to big loads, felt sweat on his brow. "It's not possible," he grumbled. "A minute ago it weighed its normal weight." His voice conveyed incredulity and worry. Pierre, the practical mechanic, bent down to inspect the stretcher base. Was a stone stuck underneath? The wood may have swelled from nighttime moisture? Maybe he could find a technical reason and fix it? He found no problems throughout his thorough inspection. Nothing appeared to block the stretcher's progress, nor did the wood distort, explaining this miraculous resistance. Concern spread like a shockwave across the gathering, the faithful instinctively around the lifeless monument. The candle flames flickered nervously in the night air, casting strange shadows on the increasingly tense and confused faces. Father Antoine stepped up, straining to keep his pastoral calm in a circumstance his theological training had not prepared him for. He said, "My brothers and sisters, let us not be alarmed." To calm everyone. "Sometimes Our Lady teaches patience and humility. Let us pray while our heroic carriers regain their strength." But the priest was more troubled than he wanted to appear. At 12 years of ministry at Villeneuve-Serbe, he had never seen anything so weird and unexplained. His seminary background helped him distinguish between true faith and common superstition. But this circumstance was beyond his comprehension. Marcel, the veteran sacristan, advised adding porters slowly. He said, "Perhaps we are simply more tired than usual tonight." Marcel, the veteran sacristan, advised adding porters slowly. He suggested, "Perhaps we are simply more tired than usual tonight," knowing full well that was not the case. He had felt this odd resistance, like the statue had become part of the earth. Pierre grimly agreed, and 4 other strong village men impulsively joined them. 8 strong men used to hard work gripped the stretcher. Henri the baker, Paul the farmer, Robert the postman, and Michel the forest ranger. They agreed to lift the statue. The exertion stiffened their faces, strained their muscles, and shortened their breathing. The result was identical. Unfathomable power bonded Our Lady of the Springs to the earth, making her appear to weigh many tons. The ensuing pause was filled with emotion and confusion. The realistic mayor and other skeptics in the assembly came to realize that they were in the face of something unfathomable. Mayor Claude Gallois, an accomplished engineer, approached. He said, "Let me check," exercising his authority and technical expertise. He leaned over, checked the ground surrounding the stretcher, made sure nothing was stuck under the sides, touched the wood and examined the bronze handles. Every second of inspection increased his confusion. He had solved hard technological problems as a civil engineer, but this unexplainable phenomena left him useless. Sister Marguerite, the assembly's venerable matriarch, approached with determination, her rosary beads jingling at her waist. Her 78 years of spiritual experience enabled her to identify those rare occasions when the ordinary became extraordinary, and the veil between the apparent and invisible thinned. With her wrinkled but firm hand on the statue's cold marble, she closed her eyes in silent prayer. In a whisper she said, "She's not ready." Only her closest friends could hear. "Lady isn't ready to leave." These barely audible words swept through the audience like wildfire, spreading from mouth to mouth with the speed of astonishing news. Interpretations spread throughout the assembly. A divine sign, special message, supernatural manifestation, or conversion call. Everyone turned to faith and personal experience for an explanation for this incomprehensible phenomena. Thomas, standing back with his phone, recorded this odd scenario with mounting uneasiness. He struggled to identify a profound emotion that threatened his journalistic objectivity. He took photographs of 8 strong, experienced men struggling to raise a statue they had carried for years. It was recorded and undisputed. Emily embraced Lucas. After calming down during the prayer, the toddler fidgeted again, sensing the building stress. His tiny hands were waving at the statue with unnerving fervor, and his eyes looked fixed on something grown-ups couldn't see. Then several folks saw an alarming feature. The statue's expression shifted subtly. Objectively, the marble hadn't moved an inch, but the candle's lighting and the crowd's shadows gave the disturbing impression that the Virgin had changed from her usual serenity to one of determination, firm resolve and expectation. Father Antoine's decision shaped this village. "My beloved brothers and sisters," he said, "let us pray deeply. Respect Our Lady's sacred will if she wants to stay here tonight. She may have something vital to tell us." The assembly instinctively knelt on the woodland floor in stunning synchrony. From 5-year-olds to 90-year-olds, 350 people bowed their heads in a rare group prayer. Spiritual anticipation, respect, and sacred awe characterized the hush that followed. First, mysterious ringing sounded in utter and reverent silence. The sound was clearly from Saint Germain's bell tower, over 500 meters away. Pure crystalline chimes divided the night air like exquisite notes. Second, lower note, then third, higher note. Burgundians heard an incredible tune at night. All heads turned toward the settlement below, creating a moving glow from their candles. The familiar silhouette of the bell tower against the starry sky took on a spooky and eerie quality because its bells were ringing without human hands. Father Antoine knew his church's bells well. A modern electrical system installed in 2010 or a sophisticated 19th-century rope system operated the 3 bells of Saint Germain, Sainte Marie la Grande, Sainte-Anne la Moyenne, and Sainte Bernadette la Petite. He checked and locked the electrical system before departing, and no parish team member stayed in the village. Everyone participated in this special parade. But the bells kept ringing regularly. Unlike a mechanical defect, it was a perfect, melodious, complicated song that no one recognized, but that everyone found oddly familiar, like a distant dream. In 1687, founder Jean-Baptiste Moreau cast Sainte Marie, the principal bell, whose deep, low B-flat sound was utilized for major liturgical ceremonies. In the darkness, its bronze voice broke out with majesty, conveying its strange call for kilometers. Sainte-Anne joined in, smaller and with a higher pitched tone suited for baptisms, marriages, and funerals. Her delicate voice mixed with her deeper sisters to create haunting beauty. With her clear G note, Sainte Bernadette enlivened the daily hours, and her thin voice completed this unexpected angelic trio. The 3 bronze voices sang a new polyphony that captivated every heart with its passionate clarity. With scientific curiosity and rising disbelief, Thomas pointed his smartphone toward the distant bell tower. Its high-definition screen showed the bronze bells clanging in their belfry. But who called? How was this possible? His intellectual thinking urgently sought a reasonable answer. Sister Marguerite, kneeling before the statue, smiled quietly, tears of delight running down her wrinkled cheeks. "She's singing for her," she quietly said, "calling her to stay with us." The kneeling throng instantly understood that she was celebrating her presence. Respectful surprise and deep spiritual emotion replaced worried murmuring. Some of the faithful wept openly at this unexpected beauty of sound that seemed to come from heaven as a benediction. Lucas's father, David, was distraught. A computer engineer and graduate of a top university, he always preferred sensible and scientific explanations. He believed in logic, evidence, and proof. But this night questioned his fundamental beliefs. How could bells ring alone? Why wouldn't a statue move? What physical phenomenon explains this? However, his wife Emily welcomed these secrets with an openness that shocked and impressed him. She said, "Listen to how beautiful it is," her eyes beaming. Little Lucas, in his mother's arms, had stopped fidgeting. He seemed hypnotized by the heavenly melody, his little hands gently beating time, as if he understood a cosmic music only adults could glimpse. He alternated between the motionless statue and the distant bell tower, as if he saw an invisible dialogue between these 2 sacred poles. Mayor Gallois discreetly called the Bonn police on his cell phone, imagining vandals or pranksters breaking into the church. His call was unsuccessful. As if the outside world had vanished, a bubble of total isolation seemed to have formed around the procession. "Network unavailable" stubbornly appeared on his screen, which was technically impossible in this area, usually well covered by cell towers. The mayor's watch showed that the mysterious chime lasted exactly 9 minutes, which seemed both eternal and fleeting. The melody became more complex, with subtle variations and sophisticated harmonies that revealed a composition of remarkable musical richness. Even the best carolineur could not have improvised such a beautiful and complicated piece. The notes rose and fell like sound ocean waves, generating crescendos and diminuendos that lifted hearts and took them to new spiritual heights. Each chord appeared to speak personally to each listener, evoking buried emotions, holy memories, and secret hopes. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the exquisite symphony ended, leaving the Burgundian countryside in absolute quiet. The third miracle of this extraordinary night occurred in this cosmic silence, when the statue's marble face began to glow softly. Even the night insects seemed to have stopped moving. The faithful initially thought it was an optical effect caused by the flickering candles, but the luminescence gradually intensified, becoming undeniable, obvious, and miraculous. It was not simply the reflection of a flame on the polished marble, but a supernatural brightness that was neither blinding nor artificial. Like the setting sun through cathedral stained glass windows, it was warm, golden, and peaceful. Sister Marguerite was the first to realize what was occurring. "She is blessing us," she exclaimed, her voice shaken with grief. "Our Lady is giving us her visible blessing. She is revealing herself to us in her glory." Her voice trembled with awe and delight. This holy light immediately and deeply changed the assemblage. The 350 pilgrims felt utter tranquility, as if each one were receiving a personal message of unconditional love and eternal comfort. Tears of anguish transformed to tears of pleasure and appreciation. Pierre Fontaine, the young mechanic, suddenly felt the early arthritis that had been bothering his joints for months disappear completely. He moved his hands in amazement, realizing that the morning pain had mysteriously disappeared. Mrs. Simone Dubois, 72, who was struggling to follow the procession due to her painful limp from an old, poorly healed pelvic fracture, stood up straight in amazement. Her leg no longer hurt. She took a few cautious steps, then more confident ones, realizing she could walk normally for the first time in 15 years. Thomas, still standing back with his smartphone, filmed these scenes of healing and intense emotion with a growing sense of confusion. His initial goal of detached, pseudoscientific observation crumbled in the face of the palpable emotion that surrounded him and overwhelmed him. Little Lucas, in his mother's arms, stretched out his chubby hands toward the luminous statue, babbling happily and making sounds of pure joy that Emily had never heard him make before. Emily felt a special, comforting warmth gradually envelope her, as if her heart were expanding to accommodate a love more vast and profound than she had ever felt in her life. Father Antoine approached the statue with a trembling bow. This light matched the mystical descriptions he had studied in his theology textbooks and the testimonies of the great saints and visionaries. The 350 voices spontaneously joined his, but this time, each word had a new meaning, depth, and truth. The congregation sang with a fervor that came from their souls, each syllable vibrating with authentic faith and pure love. The statue's light pulsed gently to the collective chant, as if beating in harmony with an invisible cosmic heart. Each worshipper felt this luminous vibration in their chest, as if their heart were synchronizing with the universe's. A spiritual warmth warmed bodies and souls simultaneously, and the air seemed purer, more invigorating, charged with positive energy that revitalized every cell. Then the fourth and most amazing miracle occurred. The statue slowly and majestically moved by itself, as if animated by a will. The 8 bearers, who had instinctively kept their hands on the handles, were drawn into this supernatural movement without initiating it. They were no longer carrying the statue, but respectfully accompanying it. They were in its independent procession. Their expression showed sacred dread, pure pleasure, reverent awe, and overwhelming delight. The procession resumed its march altered. A cosmic procession of a living, active presence replaced a human ritual worshipping an inanimate statue. The climb to the spring, usually difficult due to the steep slope and uneven terrain, was easy. The oldest participants walked with a renewed vigor they hadn't felt in decades. Despite the late hour, the children marched on without tiring. Even the path stones seemed smoother under their feet, as if nature were facilitating this miraculous procession. As they approached the sacred spring, the traditional destination of their nighttime pilgrimage, the statue's light brightened, illuminating the entire clearing that sheltered the ancient spring. The spring water, usually dark and invisible at night, sparkled and danced like thousands of liquid diamonds. The statue, still bathed in its golden light, moved majestically toward the ancestral pool. It stopped naturally, facing the gushing spring in perfect communion. The light that inhabited it seemed to project itself towards the water, creating a spectacular bridge of light between the sacred marble and the liquid crystal. The assembly spontaneously formed a perfect circle around the spring, each person instinctively finding their place in this sacred geometry. In this natural cathedral, under the starry dome that seemed to have expanded to accommodate this miracle, they all witnessed a spectacle that was beyond human understanding and touched the soul directly. The water that gushed forth seemed to sing, producing crystalline and celestial harmonics that mysteriously mingled with an angelic choir that everyone heard clearly without a human. Sister Marguerite reverently stepped forward toward the transformed spring and filled her wrinkled hands with the miraculous water. As she drank slowly and reverently, her wrinkles softened, her eyes regained their crystalline sparkle, and her back straightened naturally. "The water of eternal life," she whispered in a rejuvenated voice. "It gives us the water of true life." One by one, in an order that seemed orchestrated by a higher wisdom, the faithful respectfully drank the miracle-transformed water. Each found what their heart and body needed most. The sick, the tormented, the divided, and the desperate received physical healing, inner peace, reconciliation, and hope. Long-separated families embraced in tears. Hearts broken by loss or abandonment were mysteriously mended. Souls lost in doubt or rebellion found their spiritual path again with luminous clarity. This mystical water seemed to wash away not just bodies, but also bitter memories and spiritual wounds. Thomas, the young skeptic, was the last to approach the spring. His hands trembled as he delicately cupped the water in his palms. As he drank it slowly, he felt all his intellectual doubts and rational resistance evaporate like mist in the rising sun. What he had just experienced was real, undeniable, and transformative beyond description. The statue's light then reached its peak of beauty and intensity, bathing the assembly in a soft but powerful clarity that revealed even the smallest night landscape details. Everyone could see each other's faces with supernatural clarity, reading the love, peace, gratitude, and inner transformation happening in real time. Father Antoine, transformed by this experience that exceeded his wildest dreams, raised his arms toward the starry sky and said, "Magnificat." Slowly, with infinite gently, the light faded, like a sunrise that peacefully gives way to day. The statue returned to its white marble aspect, but something had changed. Her expression looked more alive, present, and closer to every human heart. Saint Germain's bells rang anew, marking midnight as usual. Cell phones mysteriously restored their signal. The world slowly returned to normal, but hearts would always be marked by that extraordinary night. Subscribe to discover more authentic stories about mystery and faith in our modern world. This story reminds us that hope and faith can do the impossible in a world dominated by materialism and skepticism. The Virgin Mary's statue, which refused to move to reveal her living presence, was now etched in the hearts of all who witnessed her miracle. Every May 18th, when Saint Germain's bells ring out, Villeneuve-sur-Butte residents remember with emotion the blessed night when the impossible became possible. Note: the text has been corrected to add missing punctuation, commas, periods, quotation marks, etc., and remove typos, while preserving every word of the original text. Some minor typographical errors, such as Frochecti, corrected to Français, Villeneuve-sur to Villeneuve-surb, etc., have been adjusted to reflect the apparent intent of the text, but no words have been added or deleted.